aftermath, the moon and the soil in the earth, breaking through the rocks, growing wild and tall till the buds begin to pop. So pack me in a bowl or roll me in a spliff, while you're breaking me down, you can feel your fingers stick.
Hi, I'm Ryan Herron here in Portland, Oregon.
And I'm Amanda Breese in Toronto.
And this is The Smoking Spot, a really good podcast about weed. Amanda and I are here today, and we kind of thought we'd cover something that a lot of people who are listening are interested in or have been interested in, and that is entering the cannabis industry, getting a job, maybe getting your first job, or maybe even realizing that this industry works a little differently than others. And if you want raises and you want to kind of climb the ladder, it might be a little different.
As a brand new industry, with all of the hopes and dreams, it's a very different space. And despite the horrors, a lot of people want to join us here. And so, as industry insiders, we've worked our fair share of gigs, and we get this question a lot. How do I get my foot in the door in the cannabis space? It's not very straightforward, but it can be. So, today, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some tips and tricks and ways that anyone from any background can get started.
Yeah, exactly. And if you already have a gig in the industry and you're kind of getting a little tired or bored or feeling underappreciated, it's a good time to check in and think about what are the other options for you. So yeah, Amanda and we were kind of going back and forth, worked almost every gig in this damn industry except for like extraction. And even then, like, seen my fair share of it and been around a few people doing washes and stuff. So it's like, okay, we might as well talk about it. Amanda, I want to reach back to, we're probably past the statute at this point. Can we talk about black market and the traditional market and how you were able to like connect with some jobs there early on?
This is true. There is a legacy to legal stream that many people have followed. And so for me, yes, I started out actually as a trimmer. And I think that's a really great, fun place to start. It's a really fun work environment. You get to meet people. Some places let you listen to podcasts or audio on your own. It's not very strenuous. And you get to work directly with the plant. So that is going to ingrain some lifelong lessons on what you're looking for and the difference between good quality products, medium quality products, and low quality products, right? You're going to have your hands right on and get this like really in-depth lesson on the good and bad of cannabis.
Yeah. Well, and let's kind of talk about this. That has changed quite a bit. Traditional market, typically you would see a lot of trim crews. And this is mostly in like the outdoor cultivation areas in California and Oregon, where you and your buds would basically be like a little group and you would show up somewhere and be like, look, we got 6 hands. We work this fast. These are our expectations on pay. Sometimes that's not the conversation or you don't have that yet. And then you go in and you work that harvest. And a lot of those gigs, even now, are paid by the pound. Once you finish trimming a pound, you can count that towards your daily payout. Where the rec market now that it's a little more established and it's a little more like a 9-to-5 job of trimming, you might go in and trim with a bunch of people you don't even know and you're paid hourly. Now we do see some like payment by the pound type situations still, but I would say that's more rare on the legal market.
Yes. I've also heard a couple of horror stories of the way that certain processing spaces or trim rooms are set up, where maybe you have like a designated stainless steel table that you're working at. Maybe it's a stool instead of a nice comfy chair. So you're going to want to like kind of check out the situation. I honestly, for all of the gigs we're going to talk about today, like really recommend reaching out to people who do it or seeing other people who have worked at particular companies who could give you a little bit of insight into like the working conditions, because you are going to be sitting, you are working with your hands. It is hourly, but there's also, when it comes to processing, an expectation of a minimum amount of work done. And so this is also one of those jobs where not everyone's going to be amazing. It's definitely a job where some people are better at it than others. And it's like origami. You got to have the agility of the fingers to get it going and the eyes to catch little leaves and things. it's very precision work, but at the same time, you could also just break it down to being like, I have scissors and I trim nugs and then I bag them. Pretty straightforward.
There you go. Be prepared to have strong, informed opinions on which scissors you use. Or do shit like, I just showed up to work 10 minutes early to get the good scissors, because that can greatly affect your productivity. And okay, some benefits. A lot of times you can trim at all hours. So hours can be super flexible for that job. You like to zone out, you like to listen to an audiobook for 6 hours a day. Great. You want to be really stoned while you do that. In most situations, that's not a problem. As long as you're moving fast enough and not cutting your thumbs off, nobody really cares if you're baked out of your mind. What are the other benefits I'm missing here, Amanda?
Well, it's your foot in the door to working in the cultivation space. That's
Yeah.
right. That is an entry level position that's going to set you up for seeing how indoor grows work, outdoor grows work. If you've never been on a pot farm or in a facility, this is your foot in the door. And so you're going to be able to see how facilities operate and what the cycle of the seasons is like and what the cycle of the grows are like. So if you're like a person who wants to work with the plants.
Yeah. So as far as plant touching side of the industry goes, this is probably the best way in, other than like starting in your basement. And even then, this is probably a needed step, because you have to prove that you have an eye for detail. You have to prove that you're reliable. You have to prove that you don't steal and you're not a snitch. All right. You get those things down and you show up like relatively on time for the weed industry. And that's like a good way to like move ahead and actually be able to help out in the garden. But you really do have to prove those things before they're going to let you touch plants.
Yes, absolutely. And it's going to be a great way to meet the whole team and start to see what other roles people are playing. Like being a trimmer is step one, and then you can totally move up the ladder. I think it's also a good step into other areas of processing, like extraction, for example. Some facilities are going to have it all on site. So the person who's making the gummies is a couple rooms over from the person who's trimming the flower, is a couple rooms over from the person who's pressing the rosin. Like this may be happening at smaller places all under the same roof. And so you're going to be able to also just start to see firsthand. My experience across the industry has genuinely always been that people are really open to showing you things. So a facility tour could be a way for you to just start seeing what's going on behind the scenes. One of my more memorable facility tours was in Michigan at Winewood Organics, and that's one of the places where they do it all under one roof, and the whole team is there throughout the week. And so I was able to see how their 3 grow rooms operate just in one afternoon, right? Like you want to be able to start seeing these things, understanding the equipment that's existing in that space and the vibe of the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think that's where a lot of people have started. The other avenue is bud tending, right? So if you're not as interested in working in the garden or cultivating, then maybe you want to start an edible company, or maybe you want to start a dispensary, or maybe you're thinking wholesale. Really, the best entry place there is bud tending.
So I meet a lot of bud tenders. Some of them have been in the cannabis space since before legalization. Some of them have come from other industries. Some of them are younger, older, right? Like there's a whole spectrum of people. I've met older people who have like whole ass families that wanted to work in the weed industry and started bud tending. It is where you will learn about all of the products that exist in the market, and you will learn how to use them and different benefits of different products. You will gather so much practical information from the other people you work with, from the reps coming in, from your managers. You're going to start signing up for different programming, right? You're going to have people come in and you're going to see other bud tenders on socials talking about different online courses that are free or different educational programming. We do them all the time. And you're going to start to actually learn about the product, the actual product that's circulating around. And this is such valuable information because you're going to see which brands are doing what and maybe even figure out which types of products you're most interested in and seeing more of, right? If you are a flower person and you start bud tending and someone brings in some really good hash, who knows? You might land as a hash maker someday. Or if you're in the store and the reps always look sad and overworked, you might think, this company might not be the one for me, right? So you're going to be able to see like what is actually happening in the industry, which products are successful, which brands are successful, what branding is working. Like even a few months spent bud tending is like a lifetime of information.
And let's be real, there's a lot of lousy dispensaries out there. So do your due diligence, do your homework, and find out which of the dispensaries are easy enough to get to because, hey, that's a part of having a job, and that you also would like to work there because they're carrying the kind of products that are kind of in line with your own values. And to get one of these better dispensary jobs, it does help to have a little history. So in your state, you likely cannot get a dispensary job until you're 18 or 21. So in those gap years, if you can get a retail job, that's really going to help because so many people come into the cannabis industry, want to start as a bud tender and have no retail experience. And then things like the point of sale software becomes like a big headache because you're learning basically a new language. And then also keeping track of all the SKUs, that's like the stock keeping units of every single product in the store can be really overwhelming. But if you've had to like stay late at the mall and do inventory one night, you've got it all. You've already showed up with this like beginner's knowledge that is above and beyond what most people are starting.
So true. You know, interestingly, I think for this role and really any role in the cannabis industry, it's like people should know it's a very social space. People do attend a lot of events and do a lot of networking in person. And so going to your local stores and just being a customer that introduces themselves, says hello, you know, it's, I don't want to use the word networking, but it's kind of just like community building. Like, not to talk to someone with the intention of tricking them into liking you and giving you a job, but getting to know people is a really quick way to start making moves. I worked in a dispo for maybe like a month. Like Ryan was saying, some are good, some are not. It was bad. It was one of the bad ones. And I absolutely hated every minute of it. However, I loved the people that I worked with. And I also loved interacting with the customers a lot. One of the customers that came in happened to mention that she was an artist, that she was looking for work in the cannabis industry, that she didn't know how to get cannabis specific art roles and content creation roles. And at the time, I needed a flyer designed. I hired her on the spot. I hired her. I asked for her Instagram. I liked what I saw. And I was like, I'll give you a gig right now. And we did. I followed through. She ended up designing a poster for me last year. And it was a good experience. So literally just talking to people, great way to start.
Oh, and well, hey, this goes for folks who are already in the industry as well. Here in Portland, there in Toronto, doesn't really matter where you are. This is a small community. Word gets around fast. Don't be a dick. Number one way to not get any gigs, being a dick and not paying people that you need to pay, right? Like I hear about all of the unpaid bills and the people who were stiffed at dinner and the person who was an hour late or the person who showed up to the meeting on acid and had to sit in their car. I hear all of these stories because they're real and that happens. And it's just such a small community. Like that's what we have to do when we run into each other and say, oh, did you hear about Bob? He's not doing so well. So just show up, be a cool person. Don't like blow up somebody's spot because X, Y, or Z. And I'll tell you what has served me really well in an industry that is full of a lot of people who are getting into it for the first time. A lot of people are strapped for cash or bootstrapping or whatever, is being pretty forgiving in that like, oh, you know what, this situation isn't working out with these people, and in the way I kind of had to fight them for that first invoice, I can realize they don't have a ton of dough to keep paying me to do whatever job I'm doing for them. So instead of really pushing the issue, I'm going to say, hey, look, if you guys don't want to continue for this next month, we don't have to. And then I'm not going to go immediately on my social media and blow them up for not paying me. It's like, I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, the chance to take care of things. And you will not catch any screenshots of me talking shit about anybody, because I know that those things always come back to haunt you. So it's okay to commiserate with your fellow people in the industry about something that is not going well, but taking that stuff public is actually going to probably do worse for your reputation than theirs.
I agree. Although this week I did go public.
Oh, this did happen. And also, Amanda, while I appreciate your stories and they were very truthful and from the heart, you did go and delete them after like a few hours, right?
You know, I actually do that a lot. I'll post stuff and then delete it like a few hours later. So you got to be quick on my stories if you want to catch all the tea. I didn't mention any names, but the fact is that there also needs to be a little bit of worker solidarity kind of going around. And so although it's not always public, news travels really, really fast. This week, my story was about how I had a job interview scheduled on Wednesday and how I got up and got dressed and was prepared for the interview. And then the interviewer never showed up. They didn't answer my email checking in. Hey, is like, are we rescheduling? Like, 'cause sometimes people forget, even though they scheduled it. So it's kind of rude. And you're like, okay, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe something came up, right? They didn't email me back. And then the next day I still hadn't gotten an email. So I was completely ghosted by a job interview that this company, a large company, had set up with me. Within 24 hours, I found out that that whole entire company was dissolved overnight, and that the person who I was meant to interview with, alongside their colleagues and their supervisors and their supervisors, were all fired literally overnight, and the company completely dissolved.
That's insane. That does happen in other industries, but this I mean, you said, hey, it's still a new industry, and I thought, no, we've been legal for 10 years here. That's not new at that point. But so many things are still fly by night and hard to make a buck on, and we'll pay you in X amount of days, that it's like, this is more commonplace than it should be.
I think it has become really commonplace. And after posting about it, I actually received an overwhelming amount of messages, which is partly the reason why I ended up deleting them, because I got so many messages from people who have been in the exact same situation within the past couple of years. Scheduling interviews with companies that disappeared afterwards, scheduling interviews, not hearing back from them for months at a time. There's a lot of behind the scenes scaries, but I also will admit that I still deeply love working in the cannabis industry, and I encourage others to give it a go, although it might not be for everyone because it is very up and down. And the industry is just really trying to settle into space, but there's lots of companies and there's lots of places that are still operating business as usual.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not to dissuade anyone, like there's still a lot of like fire coming off the mountain and hitting those shelves, and like the good people are driving around the state delivering it and finding things that work for themselves. And yeah, I in the last year or so, I've had gigs and jobs go from, hey, Ryan, we would love to have you on. This is great. Let's get you on the phone next week and we'll just move forward. And then next week they go, oh gosh, this client call is going to go long, so we'll just scrap the whole thing. And it's like, wait a minute, last week you're going to hire me, and this week a meeting is going long, and so it's not going to work. Wow. So yeah, you just have to kind of roll with the punches a little bit and recognize, like, hey, provide things that people really need and ask for payment up front.
I agree. And the thing is, we're also coming from an interesting place because you and I are generally these days doing a lot of gig work. And so with that comes certain challenges, like applying for jobs with smaller companies who might just need odd jobs here and there. These roles are not always going to be huge roles for huge companies. And so there is some, like uncertainty when you're doing gig work, because these are, if you're applying for a part-time sales rep role for a fairly large company and they're only hiring part-time, like it's a sign that maybe they're not doing quite as well as they'd like to be doing, because I'm sure they'd prefer a full-time sales rep. Like these companies would like more people working for them. And a big thing that you'll come across because of this is the people that are doing the hiring are not necessarily hiring managers or admin or HR. A lot of the people who are doing the hiring are people who have other roles within the company as their full-time roles. And this is something that may have just been offloaded due to lack of HR, or they volunteered because maybe they're going to be overseeing you in your role. Hard to say why, but a lot of the interviews that I've done for gigs over the past few years have often just been people with similar roles that I'm applying for, people that I would consider my equals in the workplace.
Yeah, exactly. And show up and be really solution oriented, where you're like, look, I understand this is startup energy. If you ask me to do a job that's not in my job description, I'm not going to say no. Like, I'm here to work as part of a team, not to just fill a certain role. That really helps at that tier of job where you're like, okay, I'm moving away from hourly. So that means I'm going to have to help this company really be a success instead of just handing things to a customer.
Yeah.
And I think that like once you can easily max out your position at a dispensary or even trimming. And so you have to kind of keep an eye or always be thinking about what's next. What are you working toward? Because I know a lot of bud tenders who have had the same position for a few years and are starting to get a little jaded. If you're starting to feel like, hey, my boss owes me, hey, they're not doing this for me, or I deserve better than this, a lot of times that just means like you've reached the maximum of your position. And the reason they're not giving you a raise every 6 months is because all they can afford to pay you is that much for that position. And that's just like kind of how it works out. And as much as it's like, I love that dude, he's keeping this place alive, there's only X amount they can pay you. And then you can become a manager and everything that comes with, if you like working odd hours, covering for when people come out, making schedules, making hard decisions like, oh, we might have to let this person go. If you're well suited for that, then that's like a natural place to go as a bud tender to manage. And then that's kind of good. You get off the floor a little bit. Maybe you get to decide what products make it on the shelves a little bit more, and you kind of have a little more control over things like the flower budget. So you can say, oh, you know what, we want some more high-end stuff, and pick the things you like to smoke. But that's kind of like, there are some chains of dispensaries that have like a regional manager, but that's few and far between at this point. So once you max out that, you have to start thinking about where else in the industry does it make sense somebody with a jack of all trades skill set like Amanda and I could go.
And that is how I would say bud tending is the step in the door to being a sales rep. Honestly, I think that's where then you move up into more of the corporate space with a specific brands or under an umbrella of brands. And it's just an obvious next step, because at this point you will know products and brands that you're a fan of, and you'll know products and brands that you're not a fan of. And honestly, I've met a lot of people who go from bud tender to rep roles. I came to rep roles more as an educator, education leading to sales kind of makes sense in its own way. But there aren't so many rep roles around because they're juicy. I think it's one of the fun roles people really want. It's like one of the good ones because you get to be the weed fairy. A lot of reps get samples. They get to go store to store. It's a super social role. You talk to lots of people and you promote products, right? You're representing a brand and promoting that brand. And so it is kind of a juicy one. A lot of the roles that I've had as a brand rep did not come to me through LinkedIn, did not come to me through online job applications. They came to me through networking and through knowing people, directly reaching out to brands that I like and letting them know that I'm open for work. Like, a lot of stuff happens on the ground. LinkedIn is such an amazing resource for so many reasons. One, it's one of the only social platforms where cannabis is tolerated, right? Like,
Yeah, no problem. Great reach. It's going to connect with anyone. I get emails about it. It's great.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of the cannabis industry is on LinkedIn. You can post pictures, you can use the word cannabis. It's not going to be flagged. It's a safe space for cannabis consumers and people who work in the industry. So by default, it's sort of become the industry's social platform, but which comes with pros and cons. Honestly, sometimes I think it's a little too Facebook energy for me. So I'm not a huge fan, but I do go on LinkedIn to learn things about people, to learn things about companies, and to directly reach out to companies. So there's definitely been times where you maybe see a job posting on Indeed, for example, and you apply to it. But I have a much better success when I see that a company is hiring and I directly reach out to the person on LinkedIn who is hiring or who has a role at that company associated with the job. So the sales director, they're on LinkedIn. If you see that they're hiring, why not just message them something brief and not weird, like, hey, I saw that you guys are hiring, attach the resume and say thank you. That's it. And then there's such a higher chance of them actually seeing that you applied for the role and you're moving past all the AI tech on these fucking websites that is just looking for keywords.
And Indeed is going to be the place where jobs are posted, if they are posted. It actually costs too much to post them on LinkedIn, so people avoid it, or they might post them for a day or not at all. So, although the jobs you're looking for probably won't be posted on LinkedIn, like Amanda's saying, it is the absolute best place to go and connect and reach out with those folks because they'll be there. And if they're active, then they're active. Like the little message will pop up and it'll show that you're talking with them. And yeah, as long as, like we said earlier, you're not being super annoying and saying, look at this shit I grew in my closet. It's so dank, man. And then spamming them with like 20 pictures of your like GMO, then you're fine.
Yeah.
And I think something Amanda and I have both learned when you're applying for roles where it's not just like a hiring agent or an HR person that is doing the hiring, but instead the owner of the company or that lead sales rep or whoever needs the help. It's pretty common for them to take 2 or 3 weeks to get back to you. And if you can reach out in that like 8-day period or 7-day period and say, hey, I dropped that, just letting you guys know, like I'd be a good fit and I'm ready and willing to do the work, let me know. That goes against most of the other advice I've received for applying for jobs in other industries, but it actually works quite well in cannabis,
Yes.
where everyone is like spread so thin. They're like, oh, thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, exactly. I want to talk about the time so much, but if we could just circle back to it, because before we move away from LinkedIn, if you are new to the cannabis industry and this is your first time, you're like, I've been thinking about it, I don't know where to start. Literally start by making a LinkedIn profile, set it up. And, I don't love ChatGPT, but setting up a LinkedIn profile is something that it's practically designed for, right? You're going to put in your keywords, you're going to put in your experience, you're going to cut and paste your resume essentially onto your LinkedIn. And then the number one thing you do next, once your profile set up, photo and everything, you are going to go and connect with a few hundred people who work in the cannabis industry. The nice thing about LinkedIn is on Instagram, if you go and follow 1,000 people on a brand new account, it's going to show 1,000 following, 0 followers, and it's going to look a little cringe. LinkedIn doesn't do that. It only shows your connections. And so once you start connecting with people, the numbers will just grow. And once you hit about 500, it just says 500 plus. So it looks good. So you can make your LinkedIn profile look really good really quickly. And people won't know that it's because you connected with 1,000 and only a few hundred added you. sneaky behind the scenes of how to get some numbers and how to get your profile kind of rolling, but it's quick and easy. Just start connecting with tons of people who work in the space. And like we've been saying, this is a super social industry. People will add you, people will connect with you. Do not, under any circumstances, immediately send them a message. Just connect, get a sense of the space, but start to follow people in the industry because, again, they're not necessarily always posting new jobs on the jobs tab. Sometimes someone will just post, "We're hiring. DM me your info." So you want to start to add these people into your network from top to bottom and start to get a sense of like what's going on in the industry. And it will literally take you an afternoon to set this up and to start adding people from the cannabis space. I think we all know how the internet works. Like, follow the rabbit hole through the companies.
Yeah, because there's a lot of things to fill out on LinkedIn to make your profile look sort of legit. And that like is the banner. That's your profile image. That's your work history. That's like your skills that you're good at. So you could spend a whole week just like developing your LinkedIn to look really good, including ways like Amanda said that are going to set you up and also game it a little bit where you're like, oh, you've left like several comments on things and maybe you posted like a longer story about what it feels like to try and enter the industry.
There's also a lot of really good like weekly newsletters that people are producing about like from inside the cannabis industry, about different areas of the cannabis industry. There's like a lot of them. So it's also just like a fantastic learning space. I subscribe to a ton of different newsletters from across the states, across Canada. It's people who are in the space who are sharing so much knowledge about the space. So there's just a lot to take in on LinkedIn. And so it's a really important place to land if you're looking for roles. You can also, I feel like LinkedIn is like a detective in some ways too, because you can see other people's resumes. You see how other people got to where they are today and what path. It's like a cheat sheet. Sometimes it's really refreshing to see that someone who's like head of marketing just, 10 years ago was selling furniture at the Bay. Like sometimes it's just nice to see where people came from, how they landed, different companies they've been with. You can learn a lot about companies, you can learn a lot about people, and you can learn a lot about roles, how people move up the ladder. Oh, this person was a bud tender, then they moved into rep work, then they actually moved into business to business sales. You get to follow that journey.
Yeah, and when we think about when Amanda and I were joining this industry, it really did help that you had some traditional market under your belt because you could talk the talk a little bit. And that was an important part of joining the industry 10 years ago. But now we've reached a point where people who are just starting, let's say, a trimming or bud tending role at 18, they were 8 years old when this industry really started to become quasi legal. And so there wasn't an opportunity for them to go work on a farm in Mendo when they were 8 years old, although kids do that. They just don't have their thumb out. So it does help to just be like, hey, look, I'm new here. And that's okay because there are a lot of like entry level gigs that are not that sexy, but you can get in on the ground floor and learn, oh, okay. Yeah, sweeping up the trim room and then loading those into bags for them to do like blast level extraction in the back so they can ship it to Pennsylvania. Not a great gig, but I can see, oh, what is happening over here, and I can quit this bad one and move into a space that does respect me a little bit. And speaking of that, we haven't really talked too much about extraction, namely hash making, but that is still very much an apprentice style uh, industry or wing of the industry where you really need to come in and learn under somebody or fail a lot on your own trying to figure this out. And then once you have, it's kind of a meritocracy. Once your product speaks for itself, then people want to bring their product to you to wash with them. So there are all kinds of splits and ways that you can either work for a company just washing or extracting all of their material, or even kind of do it in like a toll way where you're doing collaborations with people, or doing hash washes for farms like per pound or per job. There's a lot of different options there, and I think it's kind of like survey the situation, see what makes sense. If you want to go more like DIY traditional market type stuff, ice water extraction I think is a great place to start. Relatively inexpensive to get the bags and get started. Um, Working your way up to do a more commercial job with that, there's a lot of tech that you can get into and learn about even before starting to work with it. So you can say, "Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with the Whistler machines and how they like cool the water down and don't add ice to the extraction." Oh wow, you already know about this
Yeah.
tech? Well, if we want somebody that's going to work with it, of course we can teach them, but it's nice that they already know a little bit about it. So just find opportunities to work with people and then use your off time to like study up on where you might be headed next.
And not only that, Ryan, but it gives me so many ideas because this example you've just given, this person who knows just a little bit about the equipment, has done like maybe some apprenticeships or been able to do a little hands-on experience. Knowing a little bit about this equipment can also land you in the business to business equipment sales area. And like, I think it's an area that's really, people don't look at enough, but it's one of the only ones that has the least amount of drama right now because they're quite consistent with the work that they do. You know, my brother always said to me, like, you don't want to be the guy that opens the restaurant. You want to be the one selling the restaurant equipment. And like, because whether or not the restaurant succeeds, the equipment is sold.
Yeah, the picks and shovels guys, right? As they always say with the gold rush, sell the picks and shovels, you'll make the money. Doesn't matter if you find the gold. And I think that's why I've spent the last few years of my industry career in places that are selling things like terpene suppliers or equipment suppliers. Because, okay, we're not stuck with just one state that we can sell to. And we do have a worldwide market we can roll with. And hey, what's opening up in Europe right now? Well, a lot more cannabis friendly establishments. So even though things are slowing down here in the States, we might have opportunities to sell things internationally. And so, okay, hey, I'm going to be here for a little bit. And some folks that I know are now like the international sales rep for some of these companies that started off in California. So you can really work your way up to a global level in this industry after just a few years.
Another great example, Ryan, terpenes. That's another, product that everyone needs. And it's, you got to sell them. Someone's got to sell them to everyone. Totally. And we've both worked on the back end of wholesaling, the terpene side. So there's a couple more things we want to hit. I do want to talk about um, timelines for the job process because this is something that is probably going to put most people like into a stress induced fucking coma. And I also want to talk about the creative side of the industry. So we touched on timelines briefly, which is that you might not hear back. Like you've made the LinkedIn, you've sent out the resume, you've been applying on Indeed, you've been doing all these things for your dream entry level job into the cannabis industry. Now you're landed maybe an email back that says, "Hey, we're ready for our first round of interviews. You've been chosen." Okay. Almost never do I get emails saying you have not been chosen. So if you don't hear back from a company after like a month or two, like safe to assume you were not shortlisted. Okay. Like there's not a lot of courtesy in this process, in my opinion, since I started working in weed almost 15 years ago. Okay. Not a lot of courtesy and rejection. If you make it into the short list, into the first round of interviews, and you do your first interview, the one thing I can say about job interviews is just be a normal human person. They're not super formal. They're actually generally quite casual. And most of the time, the first interview is generally a vibe check. It's almost always a vibe check. The second interview is the one where you really are probably going to talk to your boss or your boss's boss, and you're going to want to give them your numbers, your experience. That's where you bust out some big words, but you're still bringing the vibe. Like it is really a vibe based economy in cannabis. So being stuffy and not yourself is actually probably a detriment to actually landing the role or the next round of interviews.
Yeah, even all the way up to CEOs here in this industry, even the really buttoned up guys that are like have 6 or 7 businesses going, do not want somebody in there that's no fun. Like that's just part of, like, people are in this industry for a reason. It is a real struggle. It's not just free money no matter what step in the chain you're at. So this has to be a fun thing. It just does.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, I'm not saying don't be professional, but definitely you want to bring the first person who talks to you is literally doing a vibe check and probably making sure you have a car and just the base ingredients for this role. It's usually quite basic, quite straightforward. You landed the first one, you successfully made your way through it. They said, hey, we're going to send you to round 2. This was great. You may not hear back from this company for 2+
Yeah,
months.
period. But yeah,
Like
for 2 months.
literally.
But really, yeah. Hey, stay on top of it. Email them. Be like, hey, I'm a patient. I'm excited to talk again. Let's do this.
I have never seen a role landed. The last job I took was outside of the cannabis industry, 6-week contract. I had one entry interview, a second interview with my boss, his boss, and they hired me that day. End of second interview, hired, contract sent. I had it signed by the day of the second interview, completely on, started the following week. I have never, even once in my life, seen that happen in the cannabis space. And when you start talking to people, you will hear, and these are a lot of the messages I got this week. I applied for this job in April. They didn't hire anyone until November. I did 7 job interviews. I applied for this job in August. They didn't hire me till January. I did 5 rounds of interviews. These companies are taking months to hire. So my suggestion is just keep applying to roles. You don't really have the luxury of thinking, oh, if I apply to this job, I'll hear back and know whether I got it in a month from now. They will say so, and it will not be true. It's just a very slow moving hiring process. And I honestly think it's to the detriment of the industry. I think it's causing irreparable damage to the industry, quite honestly, to have such unnecessarily lengthy interviewing processes, period. But just want you guys to know what to expect. And this isn't just on the corporate side. I had a friend message me last week who was actually like a dispensary manager, and they've had months of waiting just to get some of these roles, even in the retail space. So that is my rant on time. And in the same way that the industry will take 1,000 years to hire you, they will also take 1,000 years to pay you, because the last sort of foot in the door position that I think me and Ryan probably have the most insight into is being freelance creatives in the cannabis space. And
I'm just nodding my head. Yeah. Anytime we all get together, all the freelancers, all the writers, all the marketing dudes, even some of the sales folks, if you sell websites or software programs, or if you're just dealing in any of this stuff, like a lot of us are who have found a gig or a way to work in the industry that is not necessarily a 9 to 5, you see somebody like Amanda and I run into each other in person. We give each other a hug. Somebody starts rolling a joint, and then immediately we start complaining about clients that didn't pay us or didn't hire us, or somebody who's just dragging their feet about anything, because it is the biggest, most pain in the ass part of the entire gig.
yes, a lot of companies, if you're a writer or a photographer or content creator, if you're doing creative work in the industry, many companies are on net 30 to net 90 pay, which is honestly insane. And I actually just watched a video yesterday. It's the hot take guy on TikTok. He does the hot takes on the New York subway. And the hot take was, creatives should not be paid net 30. You don't go into a restaurant or a grocery store, buy a bunch of food and say, don't worry, I'm going to pay you in 30 days. You don't, like hire a DJ or a performer and not pay them the day of the event that they're doing. But for some reason, when you're a writer, when you're an artist, and this is not just the cannabis industry, but again, this is what we're talking about, you should expect net 30 to net fucking 90. And what that means is you get paid 30 to 90 days after you perform the service. So if you are a writer and you are writing a 1,000-word piece for a blog or a magazine, they may sign into the contract the net 30 contract, which means you will not get paid until 30 days after you've submitted your invoice. So it is a nuisance. It is extraordinarily stressful living invoice to invoice, and not knowing when they're going to land. However, it is a very fulfilling position. I love being a writer in the cannabis space. I love doing creative work. And so if you're someone who's interested in doing product reviews or writing articles about cannabis or science or any topic within the industry, my best advice to getting your foot in the door is literally start writing. Start writing. And what I mean by that is some really high quality blogs, maybe some really high quality informative pieces for LinkedIn. Like people really love the long form opinion op-eds on LinkedIn in the cannabis space. They generate a lot of buzz. I also just think that you can, some of the best gigs I've gotten, I guess this is like my key takeaway here, is I subscribe to a ton of newsletters from a ton of different companies. And I like to see what people are writing about because these companies are paying a ton of money for insights and SEO on what the people want to read. They're spending the money and then they're putting out the content. All you have to do is observe and you'll start to notice certain trends that are coming out in the newsletters, right? Certain things are going to trend and you don't have to do any of the work. They're going to email it straight to you and you're just going to take in that information and you're going to write pieces as well, or you're going to learn about that. Those companies also need writers. And so if you find you're getting a newsletter that you really love or that you think could be better, why not reply? One of the best gigs I've gotten was literally replying to an email newsletter about terpenes. It was missing information that I thought people would like. I emailed the company, like literally just replied like, hey, I love your newsletter, but here's some, feedback, some food for thought. And they said, we are literally looking for a new writer. You're hired. Boom, just like that. And I worked for them for almost 2 years.
Yeah, it's a pain in the ass writing those newsletters. And so like being solution oriented really helps because you go, hey, this is a lot of information. If I did it, I would do it a little differently and probably a little better. And also somebody has to manage that email program like a Sendinblue or a Clavio. Someone has to design that email. So now we're using like a MailChimp or even Canva. And then putting all that together and making it look nice and having a good package out of it and being able to do that over and over again for 5, 10, 12 companies, that's great. Like you just made yourself a whole gig. You're making enough to take care of yourself. You're possibly on some net 30 if they hired you with their contract. But if you wrote up the whole contract yourself with the help of Chat GPT and read over it and it feels good and you send it your way, well then, hey, now you're getting paid up front. And altogether, if you're spending a third of your time hustling up new clients and 2/3 of your time providing good value to the clients you have, it's a really nice work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't need much more than a $12 a month Canva account and a free invoice generator, which is how I got through several years of working for folks. I didn't even have an LLC until a couple of years ago. So you really don't need a whole lot to just take your talents to people and start cold calling, emailing, and that dreaded networking word to just connect with the folks who are doing the thing that you can do. And they're fed up with doing it. They're so tired of doing it. They have better things to do with their time that makes them more money. So they would just gladly hand over the keys to their social media or their photography or their email stuff because they don't want to do that stuff. And you do. So step up and do it for a bunch of people and do a really nice job.
Full circle. A lot of people are wearing a lot of hats and there's a lot of jobs that need to happen. So if you're down to work gigs, if you're down to do kind of like fill in the gaps, there's always gaps to be filled in. And that's kind of, I feel like I'm a gap filler. I always land in these funny places, but I'm kind of down with it. And to do research to look for, writing gigs or creative gigs It's as fun as going online and seeing other people like on Instagram who are doing it. Like, I like to go to the magazine shop and flip through magazines. And when I see a magazine has an article about cannabis, I take note of that and I sort to keep my eye out on what kind of content they're putting out. And then you just reach out like, hey, I have this idea, also known as a pitch, for your magazine that I've been reading. I notice you're creating new cannabis content. Like, and if you have a few pieces, a few blogs that you've written for yourself or another company, if you really solid LinkedIn thought pieces, that is a portfolio. That is literally what they're looking for. You don't even need a website. You can just send that off and send it to them. So we're almost at a time, but Ryan, you said the C word, it's contract. And that is something I just want to very briefly state. The beauty of 2025 is when someone sends you a contract, you can cut and paste it into ChatGPT and ask if there are any conflicts of interest, anything that diverts from a normal contract for this role. You can literally put the whole thing in ChatGPT and ask for feedback or any areas of concern, and you will have that feedback. If you're not good at reading these types of documents, which are, in my opinion, intentionally confusing, you can learn so much. And recently, a friend of mine who's a creative, who's an artist, was about to sign what they thought would be the greatest contract of their life. And I said, just watch out. Something about this doesn't sound right. Why don't you throw it into ChatGPT and see if there's anything weird about it? And what did they find? That the company, actually, this has happened twice this year to two different friends, that the company actually wanted to own all of their intellectual property and have all of the rights to their social media, as well as a very robust, like non-compete agreement, which wouldn't have allowed them to work for any other companies, which is crazy. It is crazy. And maybe that's something you're cool with. And hey, it's your contract, sign it. If you are not, do not sign that contract. That's negotiation. That's a whole topic for another time. There's lots of dudes on YouTube that have videos on how to negotiate.
Yeah, we're talking about getting your foot in or realizing, you know what, if you've maxed out your position, don't get salty. Just start thinking about where else you can go and be appreciated, because as much as we have a lot of young folks and people who are looking for a change of career, wanting to enter the cannabis industry still, we're here for you on that. Also, the folks that have been here with us for a while, it doesn't really work where you're just going to like be able to like climb the ladder for forever at whatever gig you have. So you might have to hop around a little bit. Having friends, having like an established social media, LinkedIn that you've been working on for a while, maybe a little portfolio that you've been working on likely for free for a little bit. Those are the sort of things that are going to give you the leg up and actually get you those gigs.
Yeah.
But if you just have like a love for this plant and the people who surround themselves with it, like, I don't know. I've worked in the food industry before, and I've had a handful of corporate gigs. Nothing is better than weed and the people in weed. It doesn't matter. For all of the complaints we want to make, the community is the best. The people who know how to like chill and appreciate life are all there. It's a good spot to be. I think we've given everyone all they need to go out there, get started, put their CVs together. You can hire us. We love that. We love gigs. We've been selling some posters lately. We really do love that. Centelligenceproject.com is a good place to go and see the sort of varieties we offer as Centelligence, our flavor house company that we do in consultations for flavor and fragrance. And buy a wheel while you're over there. Level up your communication about the plant. Follow us on all the social medias.
Said no matter what kind of pain and anguish life may bring you, oh, smoke it up, hold it down, and don't ever stop. Well, you can always find your smoking spot. Yeah, you can always find your smoking spot.